CTTB Music Podcast.
Here we go. Another month, and we're back again. And we have 5 more albums for people to go about. We have David Gilmour, Looking Strange, LL Cool J, The Force. Can't stream quickly. Doechii, Alligator Bites, Never Heal, which is a mixtape, obviously not an album. We've come across this thing before. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Wild God. And finally, I don't really know how to pronounce her name. I'm going with Nilufer Yanya.
Yeah.
But I probably should have looked at it. I'm sure online there's probably a way of pronouncing her name properly. And I apologise to her in advance. But we will start with the 5th studio solo album from the ex-Pink Floyd guitarist and singer David Gilmour, Looking Strange. His first since 2015's Rattle That Lock, which we reviewed on podcast 9 of that year. So actually,
Good times.
Yeah, so we're keeping on top of David's.
Excellent.
David's
keeping on top of his input.
Solo because I mean 9 years ago we reviewed his last album.
Excellent.
So Pete, some Pink Floydy, Gilmour-y stuff.
Well, I should talk over the snoring dog at my feet.
Yes. Walter the dog is guest snorer.
Guest snorer this week. Yeah. Oh no, he objects to that. So anyway, Looking Strange, David Gilmour. Okay. Where this begins is not music to surprise long-term fans of Gilmour here. I think for certainly as this album beds in, it's a very familiar long-term fan. When I say long-term fans, I mean Pink Floyd fans, really.
Yeah.
I'm not alluding to anything else there. And the title track in particular, obviously, you got Richard Wright on the keyboards, and it just comes straight out of a latter-day Pink Floyd album. It really does, that particular track.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's good in a respect because actually what comes later, as I'll get to in a 30 seconds time, is something quite else. But there's some rather lush production and lovely string arrangements there, and the opening few tracks, and underneath obviously Gilmour's signature guitar licks and smoky vocals.
Yes, the husky side.
Yeah, the husky side of Gilmour, certainly on this album. So old-time fans will like that. But there's enough here going on. There's a certain ambience that will attract, I think, any fan of a quiet, acoustic, mellow album. I think there's enough. What I'm saying is there's enough going on here to appeal broader. And this brings me on to my second point, which is there's a moment in the album about a third the way through when Romany Gilmour, no relation, actually she is a relation, first appears. And I feel at that point the album really shifts the tone or shifts the gear. Almost as if there's a little brief interlude just before she appears. The track she's on.
Yes, because she appears before in BVs before she's on the track, when she's actually...
So between 2 points is the track that she's clearly on. But just before that, there's a little musical interlude. Vita Brevis.
Yes.
If I've got that right. And it's almost like that's the deliberate closing of a chapter. And then you get chapter 2, if you will. And then the album sort of shifts a gear. And actually, I find that shift quite good, he says. It's almost like it's reflective of the very opening of the album. See, at the very opening of the album, you have another little musical interlude called Black Cat, which is almost Moby.
Yeah, okay. So
in
I see where you come from.
Sort of instrumental ambiance, Moby-esque definitely, and then it sort of reflects back to that, and then here we are a third of the way in, and it kicks in. And from that point onwards, I think actually moves forward. And I think that's why new fans will come to this, maybe, and actually appreciate it rather than bother about the history of it and all that. Overall, thoughts, if that wasn't cohesive enough, which it wasn't. It's not my particular favourite flavour of mellow, but it's okay.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the production. I think the production's interesting because obviously the production is by Charles Andrew, who is best known for doing the Alt J stuff.
Yeah.
And interestingly, apparently Gilmour had kind of heard some of that and wanting not to just churn out the same kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And have somebody involved that was actually going to challenge him rather than kind of go, yeah, Dave, just do, that's great, that's great.
And you could,
So he got him involved, and apparently it was quite funny when you consider how the album turned out. Apparently, he was very much kind of like, I'm not sure about all this guitar stuff. Let's guitar solos, and then as they worked through the albums, they got to think again. He kind of swear and go, no, I quite like guitar solo actually. Yeah, let's have a guitar solo. Yeah. So I think they both rubbed off on each other in that way. And I agree with quite a lot of what he said. I mean, I personally, because I'm more of a Floyd fan, I suppose, I think the first half of the album is stronger than the second half of the album, up until and including the song where Romany's singing on. The title track. I can't be the only person that's listening to the title track thinking, Black Velvet in a little miles Black Velvet in a slow
yes.
By Alana Mars. There's very much that going on. I'm sorry. That was just... It's one of a couple of tracks of this podcast where I found myself humming something and then going, what is that? And then going, oh, hello.
Yeah.
Although actually, there's a Pink Floyd song called Dogs of War, which also has that similar kind of, I suppose, bass-driven thing. I'm not sure if Guy Pratt plays on that particular track on this one, but he certainly does on Dogs of War. So maybe it's just more of a hit, a throwback to that. A couple of tracks towards the end of the album, I was a bit kind of like, yeah. Is it dark? Dark something?
Oh yes.
That I was a bit kind of like, it's fine. Although it probably has the best guitar work on it. So I thought the track itself, interestingly, Mrs. Gilmour, Polly Sampson, it's a bit of a family affair, wrote most of the lyrics to the album, and I think she does a really good job actually of encapsulating where David Gilmour would be as a singer. So actually, I think it works really well as her as the kind of lyricist. I agree that I think the Romany stuff is
strong.
Is good.
Yeah. Dark and Velvet Nights.
Yes, Dark and Velvet Nights. Yes.
Yeah.
And also, like at the end, they had a nice touch of the original jam of what led to Looking Strange. Which, as you go, has Richard right on it before he snuffed it. So yeah, it's quite. I think it's to use one of our old favourites. I think it's a solid album, Pete.
It is solid.
Yeah, I think it's solid and nice, and I mean nice in a nice way.
Yeah.
Rather than a nice way. Moving on, and again, someone that's been away for a while. We have LL Cool J back with The Force, his first album in 11 years. We've not reviewed Mr. Cool J before. It's been spending a lot of time, mostly over the last umpteen years, being in NCSI Special Agent Sam Hanna in NCIS, isn't it? Yes.
That's the one. Is it Miami?
I think it's the LA one.
Well, that would... Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But despite that, it is still his 14th studio album from Lady Love's Cool James. From my point of view, it's actually really nice to have him back. Actually, because I always had a lot of time for LA back in LA.
LL.
And LL back in the day. And I actually think this is a decent return, frankly. It's not a classic by any means.
No.
But I think it still shows that he's got chops, as they say. Really strong start and ending for me. So I like the opening track that's got Snoop on, Spirit of Cyrus, and I think equally the end two tracks, which are Murdergram 2, which is a sequel to Murdergram of the Moment I Said Knock You Out album, which has Eminem on it, and then The Vow, which ends the album, which has some younger rappers on it. I think really, really good. In between that, it's a bit hit and miss, but I think when it hits, I think it's quite interesting. So 30 Decembers, I quite like how it tackles the issue of kind of like the whole self-worth and isolation thing. Proclivities throws back to his Jingling Baby track from '89, and also has Gary Newman's ME running through it, and Sweetie throws in some extra raps on that, which I think works really well. There's good samples actually throughout the album. It tends to be one or two samples running through every track, so it's not overpowering what the kind of vocals. And I think the production by Q-Tip on that front is really, really good, because there's actually space for the vocals. It sounds really good. Really like the line in Black Code Suite, or lines, where it says, "I'm the ingenuity, the mental acuity, Duke Ellington dexterity, I'm a true rarity, I'm the sound of Miles Davis, it's impossible to bury me." You know, great rhyming, and there's a lot of really good rhyme. There's some crap rhyming as well, but there's some really good rhyming going on. I should mention that on one track you do have Michael Jackson and sample and P. Diddy mentioned, which I reckon is a full house these days. Lots of rap royalty on here. So you got Snoop, you've got Busta Rhymes, you've got Nas, Eminem, and some youngsters as well, which is, I'm sure, whilst they were happy to step up, and it shows the community spirit that rap has, part of me felt that less would have been more, perhaps. But overall, whilst not, outstanding, I thought it was quite an enjoyable return.
I agree. I think it's a modern rap album from a classic artist. I particularly thought the opening 4 or 5 tracks really do flow really well. It's really on point. And I think, again, it's fair to say the first half is possibly stronger. That said, there's some pretty good stuff in the second half. The highlights for me, you've mentioned 30 Decembers, which was quite affecting, a bit more personal, I suppose, in terms of where he is now versus where he used to be. Run It Black. I like Huey in the Chair. Huey in the Chair.
Huey in the Chair's good.
Huey in the Chair.
Quite rightly kind of like bigging up Huey Newton.
Yeah.
Black Panthers. And actually there's quite a lot of stuff about, there is a theme that runs through, as you might expect, about kind of freedom and equality and race relations and stuff that kind of cuts through the lyrics.
Yeah. Indeed. And
okay, Walter, sorry.
Walter's going to turn the mic down in a second.
Yes. we have less Snoop Dogg, more Walter Dog, who is trying to destroy the studio.
And the Eminem track Murdergram 2. I actually, having reviewed the Eminem album on our previous edition, I thought that worked really well. It's clearly a bit more Eminem production in there as well, you can tell. It also name checks the Overlord, which I thought you'd like.
Yes.
And I think that provides a strong, I know it's not the final track, but it provides a strong close to the second half of the album too. So overall, on repeated listens, it zips by. It actually does move at pace.
It does, yeah.
And I'll come back to that point later in the podcast, because it's a combination of times of classic hip hop. There's a good slice of funk in there from time to time, but the pace never really drops at all. Actually, it's boom, 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 boom. It just goes.
I think the production is one of the things that keeps that going as well.
Yeah, it's very fast as well, which is impressive. I liked it.
Good. We're going to... I originally wasn't going to do the 2 rap albums back to back, but I've decided to... Because actually I personally think that Doechii's style actually owes more to old school rap than new school rap. So, so we'll go for Doechii Alligator Bites Never Heal mixtape, 3rd mixtape from the American rapper. Still no official album, but as we know, in this world, it doesn't really matter, and it's not a mixtape because it's not on tape. So it's just...
Glad for clarifying.
It's just really...
Thanks.
So the whole mixtape thing...
Thanks for that.
Annoys me. Just because it's...
Do you want...
It's not a mixtape.
Do you want a little bit of a hiss in the background, with that one?
Oh my god, it's not a mixtape. Anyway,
I mean, there's no hiss on this, because actually one of the standout things about this album is it's not an album, mixtape. It's fantastically produced. There's a quality to the production that goes all the way through this as well, whether it's at pace or a little bit slower from time to time, whether it's touching on classic hip hop, as you rightly said, or whether it's moving into something a bit more modern. And when I say classic hip hop, there's some real sunny, that sort of sunny hip hop vibe from the sort of late 80s, early 90s, kind of almost TLC, but not TLC, but
Well, it's TLC meets Will Smith meets...
Yeah, Will Smith's probably a better example.
Meets LL Cool J.
Meets LL Cool J. On Wait, the track in particular, that sort of grabbed me there. And I think it's Nissan Altima, which kind of song. That's a good song too. I mentioned the slow. You get the slow soulful with Bloom, but then there's other stuff on here as well. And if there is a theme across the album, it's an artist following their dream and living the darker side of Hollywood.
Indeed.
And it is quite, again, like the LL Cool J album, I don't want to keep making the comparison, it is quite a sunny album at times, but then it has this darker edge, which I think only a younger artist could do now. Whether it's drugs, whether it's pills, whether it's an ex-boyfriend, or whether it's herself, from the track Catfish, which again is very Eminem style in terms of its duality and the conversation between...
Well, Catfish
presumably two sides of the same person.
Catfish and Denial is a River both utilise that.
Yes, and Denial is a River. Yeah, absolutely. Use that. And I wanted to say Bald Peanuts and Stankapoo because that was just amusing, and I'm 12 years old.
Yes, Stankapoo I thought was just a great opening track. So you've literally gone on Stankapoo. It's you feel like you're Peter Griffin to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. I was quite impressed with this. I mean, I don't usually do this, but she describes this as on her Instagram as the alligator performs a spinning maneuver known as the death roll to submerge and dismember its prey underwater. The past year, I've grappled with what felt like relentless death roll in my life. A dance of drowning my own vices, battling differences with my label, and creative numbness that broke me. In my research about alligator attacks, I found that a common thread in each survivor was the main reason they survived was because they fought back. This mixtape is my fight back. I am nobody's prey. I was born to be a predator. So there. I agree. But generally speaking, I agree with that. Denial is River, which I threw in there, is possibly one of my favourite tracks of this entire podcast, the thing, because I love the kind of conversations having with that, when it's talking about, I've had some problems. Do you mean drugs? No, I haven't. Do you mean drugs? You mean drugs? No, I do like drugs. Yeah, it's fine. Yes, Walter.
You like drugs.
Walter likes drugs. Walter likes everything. Are you Walter White? Walter, stop it. What did you think of the Doechii album? Okay.
There you go.
There we go.
Prefer Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need an intervention. We need an intervention on our podcast because Snoop Dogg here is snooping. Walter Dog has left the building.
You're going to keep all this in, right?
Yeah, of course, I get it. Well, no, you know how I stopped doing editing a long time ago. Yeah. I agree with what you said about Catfish as well, which I think is also one of the best tracks of the album. Demonstrates a singing voice across a couple of songs as well, which I think is interesting because obviously she's whilst this is mainly a rap album, on tracks like Hide and Seek and Nissan Altima and a couple of Slide as well, proves that, you know, carry a tune just in old-fashioned singing style as well. Definitely enough here to make me interested in keeping up with her future releases and any album if it ever appears. having had 3 mixtapes, why bother?
I think it counts, right?
Walter, you just walked back into the room, yeah?
I think it counts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Walter, we're moving on, Walter. Let me ask you how you feel. Okay. I didn't even tell you who we're going to review next. Walter, you just stop.
For the listener, Scott just pointed vigorously at the door and Walter walked out.
I'm not sure Walter can handle Nick Cave in the Bad Seeds.
Go on.
It's the 18th studio album from Cave and the Bad Seeds. We have reviewed the Bad Seeds twice before on the
Yes.
2016 for Skeleton Tree on podcast 10 and 2013 for Push Away the Sky on podcast 3. This is just me because the opening track kicks off as the dog walks back into the room. Song of the Lake. It's a song that kind of feels to me like it's like started midway through.
Yeah.
So it's like a bridge and a chorus rather than a complete song. And yet somehow it still kind of really works as the opening track, which is just odd. And then you move from there to Rape and Pillage in the Retirement Village, which is not the title of the title track, but is one of the lines at the start of the title track. This song has rhymes in it which rappers in this podcast would be more than pleased with, frankly. It's classic Cave storytelling. I love the choir-like BVs, although weirdly reminded me of a Take That song. And I couldn't place which Take That song it was. It's when there was it's a 3 of them Take That period.
Right,
thing.
okay.
But I keep, every time I hear it going, no, not sure what it is, but I'm fairly certain I'm probably the only review of the Nick Cave album that's going to mention there's a bit.
I did not get
like
that, so
that.
I'll have to go back. Yeah.
The end of it, though, has this really uplifting religious feel that Cave does so well.
Yeah.
And a fade out, which the whole album has fade outs rather than songs ending, which I've never been a fan of the fade out particularly, but you never mind.
Yeah.
But this opening pair of tracks, I think, sets the stage for the album. It's familiar and comforting to anyone that's listened to any Nick Cave before. But I also think it's quite vibrant, despite being at least initially feeling like quite a laid-back, quite record.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of blues ethos, I suppose, that kind of sits across the album. whether it's in the kind of trope of repeated lyrics or just the kind of pacing of stuff. And in Cave's personal life over the last 10 years, there's a reason why, several reasons why he could be singing the blues. So we'll forgive him on that one. And in a week where we lost Chris Christopherson, it was great to hear him literally name-checked on Frogs.
I clocked
the
that.
third track.
Yeah. And it's a nice little name check as well.
Nice
Quite
little name
a prophetic name check, as it turned out.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
And actually nods back to the lyrics of Sunday Morning Coming Down.
Yeah.
Because in the Nick Cave song it says it's Sunday morning and I'm holding your hand. Chris Christopherson walks by kicking a can in a shirt he hasn't washed for years, which definitely goes back to Sunday Morning Coming Down, which has the lyrics, watched a small kid playing with a can that he was kicking, and then just a bit on from that, I fumbled in my closet, threw my clothes and found my cleanest dirty shirt, which I still think is one of the best lines ever written. A Long Dark Night later in the album is also, I kind of thought, very much in the Chris Christopherson vein. I could quite easily hear him actually kind of doing that kind of song. Rest of the album, again, it kind of follows that same kind of thing. So you've got Final Rescue Attempt, which has a repeated keys riff that kind of is almost kind of like hypnotic bass for the main bit of the track. There's probably nothing on the album that's more typically Nick Cave than that song, I don't think. And you have the kind of repeated thing of I will always love you, but not in a Dolly Whitney kind of way.
Yes.
Is it conversion, which has hints of, to me, it reminded me of Leonard Cohen's famous Blue Raincoat in the melody. But again, another one of the things that I think Nick Cave over the years has done so well, which is to have a really somber kind of song that just becomes totally uplifting with kind of choir backing vocals in the kind of second half kind of thing. And in fact, the final track, As the Water Covers the Sea, is almost hymn-like, frankly.
Yeah.
And I think that is the essence of Nick Cave. There's long been a kind of religiosity, if that's even a word, about his music and Warren Ellis's music, who he co-writes with, which juxtaposes kind of joy with sorrow. And I think this whole album is another fine example of that. And it took a few listens, to be honest, before it kind of really worked its magic, but I was listening to it again on my way home from work today, and I just kind of thought, you know what, this is just a truly lovely record.
It is. And it's a surprisingly sunny album at times, at least musically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there is an additional warmth to it all. And not only in the music or the production, but also in the delivery of the lyrics, bizarrely, which are obviously quite dark at times. And you're right, I mean, the opener, Song of the Lake, the title track, and Frogs, that sort of opening trio that you referred to, I think that it feels very much true of that. And the track Joy in particular, I enjoyed. Sorry. It brings out an acknowledgement. I think it brings out the acknowledgement of the grief that pervades the album, and yet does it in such a way that it almost draws a line under it and moves forward, which is wonderful. A true reflection of joy, but it's not happy, which is interesting. An interesting dichotomy, I think. And you could almost describe it, I think you have, the whole album like that.
Yeah.
It's a happy album, but it's not. It's a joyful album, but it's not happy. And like you, I think the near gospel of conversion is, there's underneath that amazing chorus, that sort of religiosity, as you put it, there's like a guitar that snarls away.
Yeah.
So it's like, you've got this sort of almost gospel overlay, but actually underneath the music's just sort of poking you a little bit, as if to say this is, just leaves you a little bit uncomfortable, which again was brilliant. And without spoiling the ending of the podcast, this is the only album this month that I put straight back on on repeat as soon as I'd listened to it all the way through the first time.
There you go. Funny enough, I didn't, but it is, again, jumping ahead. No offense to the final album, but it is the one that I have been drawn back to.
Yes.
More than the other records on the podcast.
In fact, I mean, as we look down the barrel of autumn towards winter and think about the end of the year, this scores high.
I would tend to agree.
Yeah.
So, moving ahead to the fact that we already know, listeners, what the album of the podcast is, let's move on to the final album, the third album from a young Brit songwriter, who may or may not be called Nilufer Yanya.
Well
done. My Method Actor. So Pete, and it's again third album, and with someone I admit I was aware of a second album coming out, but wasn't knowingly aware of her actual sound and music until this record.
I hate to bring it down again. We could have finished on Nick Cave, it'd have been brilliant. This is an interesting album. A solid album, if you will. I hate to say it. On the one hand, it's, again, really interesting music. And I mean that genuinely. It is really interesting album musically. It leans into so many different styles. It certainly begins with a raw, rockier edge. And I think I prefer the opening because of that. Because of that edge it has to it. And I think what happens subsequently is it does go a lot mellower, a lot quieter, and a lot more melancholic, and softer is the word, softer in its sound, which I
maybe samey
liked less. Yes. That's not to say there aren't highlights, because for me the nearly title track, Method Actor, had something of an indie rock vibe to it. I could almost imagine a band like, forgive me, Elbow doing this sort of style. Yeah. Particularly on that track. What can I say? I've been listening to a lot of their stuff recently. I
thought that maybe certainly in the earlier couple of tracks, maybe kind of block party.
Yes. So it has that indie vibe to it, for sure. And Binding, which I guess is the beginning of the softer run of songs.
That is lovely, though.
Which is lovely. And then Just the Western, which I think is a little bit later in the album. Again, I think there's a bit more of the folk. There's certainly a bit more of the indie pop in there. But other than that, I struggled. This is the one I couldn't carry. This is the one I sort of kept coming back to, and I was like, I'm not quite sure where this album sits.
I can kind of get that, because my problem with this album is not the tracks per se. It was the fact that for me, I'm not sure it quite holds together as an album, and partly because of what you said. It starts off first 2 or 3 tracks that are folky, and then you get this fuzzy indie guitars come in, which is blinding. It's great. You're thinking, oh yeah, I like this. This is good fun. And actually, like I say, it reminded me a bit of Amani Coppola, who I'd forgotten about until I started sorting through my CDs the other week, and it's like, oh yes, Amani Coppola. But then it takes, as you say, a less fuzzy direction and gets more mellow. And then there's less kind of texture in the record. So it does become samey, and it's not because the tracks are rubbish, but it's just because it just becomes a bit one-notey. And you're thinking, no, what we really need is another track where you've got the fuzzy guitar coming in, just kind of go, oh, I look at that. You mentioned Binding, which I think is absolutely lovely.
Absolutely lovely.
Vocally reminded me of Paula Cole. And Mutations, also beautiful. I also thought there were hints, that whole album has hints of 90s indie, 70s folk, bits of Joan Armour Trading and people like that kind of thrown in. And I think there's a lot of stuff to admire in the record, but I'm not sure it quite hangs.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of, as I said towards the end with Just the Western, it does bring the vibe back up a bit, and maybe that's why that one stands out. As I say, it's a solid, and it's a good solid.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's a bad record.
No, not at all. I think perhaps after some of the other albums we've listened to, the pace, and I said right at the top about David Gilmour, it was mellow but not my kind of mellow, and this was mellow but again not my kind of mellow.
And on that note, join us next month for more fun and frolics, and potentially Horsey.
Ooh,
I know.